how do MPs respond to this without, in some sense, undermining the essence of democracy? Lindsay Hoyle is the Speaker of the House of Commons and he joins us now. Can you talk us through how you heard about this and what your feelings were as the news began to come in this afternoon?
Well, first of all, can I just say how all our thoughts are with David's family, all his friends, which he had so many of across all of the political divide. I've got to say, we're all reeling. It's a dark day. It's a very sad day. The fact when I got that phone call from the security people to say, there's a very sad incident just taken place. Sir David Amess has had multiple stab wounds and it's not looking good. That's when I knew how serious again this attack had been. As I say, we're all in shock. Whatever happens, whatever political divides we have, different opinions we have, the one thing that will always unite us is the coming together of politicians who may have different views, but will unite us because we all believe in democracy. This is an attack on democracy. This is an attack on the established way that we do business. People who do not like our values, people who do not support our values, will not stop or will get in the way of ensuring that democracy survives. And that's what David will want. A great politician, a man who loved his job, loved being a member of Parliament. He was such a happy person, jolly, friendly, chatty, but he loved his constituency. He always wanted to talk about Southend West. He wanted the city of Southend. He always wanted to speak about animals, but he was a friend to all. He wasn't a nasty politician, he was a nice politician. He was a great politician. He will be missed by all. But as I say, this has left a hole in all our hearts. It really is a sad day for democracy and another sad day for Parliament.
You've talked about the values that you share across the political spectrum in the House. I wonder whether you also sense a coarsening or more violent type of rhetoric, a more threatening atmosphere. Is that something that also unites members? A sense that in some sense politics has changed?
Of course, social media gives people different outlets to allow the hate, the venom, and it does unite people. We saw that on Capitol Hill. Social media was the way that that was charged and the way that people were brought together to try and bring down democracy. What we will always do is take security seriously. We've got to make sure that democracy survives this. And what I made sure tonight was, I did my surgery tonight because people are not going to stop us. The one thing we have is a relationship with our constituents in this country. It's that relationship that we've built up, that trust with the electors, where they can meet the MP, share their issues, share those problems. What David was doing today, I've done tonight, because it's so, so important. What we've got to do is rally round, be there for David's family, be there for David. Make sure that we support other politicians. We've got to make sure the politicians are safe, the people who work for them, the family, the people of the House of Commons. We've seen the terrorist attack there as well. What we won't do, we won't give in to it though. We will continue to ensure that democracy will be there. We've got to make sure we have that relationship with our electors. Well, that's the unique part of British politics. But we've got to make sure MPs are safe.
Given your passion for maintaining that direct contact with electors, how do you fulfil that last point, ensuring safety? And you've said you're going to look into it today as a result of this incident. Is it possible to change the balance to effectively to protect people more without in some way making those MPs more distant from their constituents?
What we've got to get it right. It's not about a knee-jerk reaction of what I say tonight. And of course, you wouldn't expect me to go into the security measures. What I can assure you is we are continuously looking, upgrading, seeing what more support we can give, trying to make sure we do the best things by MPs to carry out their duties. There's staff that work for them, whether that's in the constituency or in Westminster, or the staff that works in Westminster itself. We take that very, very seriously. And it's always being reviewed. What I've got to say is, this is shock, this is horror. we're all in a very dark place. But what I do know is that David believed in the Commons. He believed in the electoral system. And what we've got to do is get good to come out of bad. And it will be about, quite rightly, I spoke with the Home Secretary today, I spoke with the Prime Minister tonight. It's about doing the right things, working with the police constabularies right across the United Kingdom, because it's about joining that up. And I know that they're contacting all the MPs to check about their safety, to reassure them. Because in the end, we've got to make sure that that is a priority. But as I say, we cannot let those people who do not share our values or share democracy, they will not win, and we won't let them win. But I do say again, we will continue to look at security. That is ongoing.
Thank you.
And it will continue.
Lindsay Hall, thank you very much. Many MPs have been changing their arrangements in recent years. They've ensured that they're never unaccompanied during surgeries or been careful about publicising their whereabouts too far in advance. In Sir David Amess's case, he'd been advised by police to install a panic button in his home as well. But the provision of armed detectives is preserved for certain ministers and those under very high risk of attacks. Many MPs wouldn't want such protection anyway. They prefer to achieve a balance between safety and accessibility. But both the Home Secretary and the Speaker of the Commons, as we've just heard, have said they're reviewing MPs' security. And today is hardly an isolated incident. This isn't the first time a British politician has been attacked or even murdered in their constituency. The killing of Jo Cox in 2016 was the first murder of a sitting MP in a quarter of a century.
I've decided I'm going to approach being a Member of Parliament with a decent, healthy chunk of cynicism and humour.
The country was rocked when, on the eve of the Brexit referendum, Jo Cox was shot and stabbed by one of her constituents, Thomas Mair, who made clear he was serving an extremist political agenda. Her murder came after the stabbing of Labour MP Stephen Timms in 2010.
I shouted something. It was clear she was going to make another stab.
Like today, that attacker took advantage of a constituency surgery to take revenge for Mr. Timms voting for the Iraq War. Official advice was never to meet constituents alone, but in 2000, Andrew Pennington, a county councillor, was killed in a samurai sword attack while defending the then Lib Dem MP for Cheltenham, Nigel Jones, at his offices. And in the Commons chambers too, security vulnerabilities have been shown up. The 2017 terror attack exposed the risk not just to politicians, but to those protecting them as well. That precarious balance between safety and openness to the public was tragically laid bare once again today.
David Amess. Last Friday,
Sir David Amess himself bemoaned the greater security that spoiled the British tradition of politicians being open to meet their constituents. Inevitably, there'll now be renewed debate over their safety. Are politicians adequately protected? Can they be without tarnishing the essence of democracy? Well, joining us now are the Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley, for the former Northern Ireland Minister and Conservative MP, Shailesh Vara, and former Labour MP, Paula Sherriff. We'll come back to the security point in a moment, but let's just remind ourselves of the man himself. Paula, your politics were obviously very different to Sir David's. How did you become such good friends?
So I guess, like you've just alluded, on paper, David and I possibly, shouldn't have been friends, if you like. He was the most wonderful man. He was caring, he was kind, he was a gentleman, and he was very, very funny. I got to know him when we both went on a foreign trip to the Middle East. And since then, he lit up a room when he walked into a room. He was an amazing man, and he kept in touch with me when I lost my parliamentary seat, and he was a great support to me when I was diagnosed with cancer last year. And I heard from him as recently as just 2 weeks ago. And like Lindsay Hoyle just said, my thoughts are with his family. I can't imagine their turmoil today, but the country is a far poorer place for David's passing.
Peter Bottomley, I mean, what will you miss most about him? I mean, you've got decades in common with him in the House.
The personal is the smile, and as somebody rightly said, no one's ever seen him frowning. In practical terms, he ran the all-party fire safety group for leaseholders. I ran the leasehold reform and commonhold reform group. We've had 4 meetings during the last year, and that's a big gap in terms of taking a constituency experience of one constituent and turning it into a national campaign. It's what each of us do, and I think he epitomises what nearly every MP does. Take what you find in the constituency and make, at national level, justice and law come together.
At the end, Demetrio says that the causes he championed were not necessarily ones you would have assumed he would get behind, but presumably led, as you say, by constituency.
Yeah, and we stand for election against each other, but once you're there, you work for everyone. And if someone comes to you with a problem that needs work happening at the level of England or that kingdom, you work at it. And it applies whether you're Paula, when her time, my time, Shailish's, that's what we do.
Shailesh, to what extent do you think the atmosphere is changing, being in the House and the way you interact with your constituents?
Well, first of all, can I just extend my thoughts and prayers to David's family and loved ones, and Parliament has lost a true gentleman today. In terms of how we respond in Parliament, certainly we have to be careful, but I think that it's important we recognise that a central element of our democracy is that accessibility that the public have to their elected Member of Parliament. And whilst the focus at the moment is on surgeries, I think it's important to recognise that as Members of Parliament, we're out and about in many other occasions and events. I mean, tomorrow I'm attending an event, a public event. And so I think when we're looking at security, we need to consider in the whole rather than just for surgeries. But certainly what I've noticed in my nearly 17 years is that the aggression that is coming over from the public is a lot more than before. The emails are a lot more hostile, the language is a lot more aggressive, and I've met some of the people who've written some of these emails, and I've spoken to them, and I've said we can try and have an engagement and agree to disagree, but let's try and do it in a measured way. And they say that the language they're using is actually acceptable. And I think that is the critical thing, that what many of us would regard as hostile and aggressive language and behaviour is to some people normal, and that we need to be careful of.
Paula, I know female MPs are targeted by more misogynistic and violent type of language in their communications with constituents and online with public abuse. I mean, what is your own calculation about re-entering the political fray? Is it something that, as a result of everything that's happened, you would think twice about now?
I think it's understandable that anybody would think twice given what's happened, particularly today. Personally, I still believe in the power of politics. Politics is an incredible thing and it's an incredible platform to achieve change. But it's clear, whilst of course we have to maintain democracy, and democracy is absolutely crucial, we have to try and strike a balance, and we have to keep MPs and other elected members and other people in public life safe as well. So I think changes do have to be made, but you know, at the end of the day, MPs tend to really like people, and the vast majority of MPs, irrespective of which party you represent, want to do the best for their constituents. And you know, we want to engage, we want to participate, and we want to listen, and we want to be where our constituents are. So I think, you know, there isn't anybody who would enjoy the concept of having armed police outside of advice surgeries, for example. You know, but that said, you know, there clearly needs to be a review just to ensure that everything that can be done is being done.
I'd like to sort of add a point, which is MPs are not special. More women police officers have been murdered than MPs over the last, any period you'd like to take. If you take being a mental health worker, if you take being a lone shopkeeper, public transport staff, there are many more people who need to also be vigilant but also engage with the public. We aren't special and we aren't at particular risk. All right, there've been more deaths, tragic, but don't let us do what the people who, not talking about David Amess's attacker, but generally people do these things for publicity and public reaction. And we ought to try to make our reaction not what they want, but something which gets them submerged, suppressed.
I'm curious as to whether if one of your own kids or a close friend's son or daughter came to you and said, would you recommend I go for selection as an MP, what would you say to them?
I would say yes. And I don't normally talk about this. My wife was an MP for over 20 years. About once every 4 or 5 years, she was assaulted or threatened violently. It happens worse to women than to men. But the fact is that there are these risks, but she had those risks when she was a psychiatric social worker, going and calling on people under stress. And the same thing would apply to the people in our family who are women police officers. They answer blue light calls. So I think that we ought to just keep a sense of proportion for members of Parliament. We have to be vigilant, but we have to be diligent. And the diligence is, as Silas was saying, in our constituencies, being out and about. And if there's a gap caused by an attack like this, let's fill the gap with more people who want to serve.
Silas, presumably having been under the type of police protection that a Northern Ireland minister has, you wouldn't want to see other MPs?
Absolutely not. I mean, the kind of protection that I had as a minister, it is overbearing. You get used to it because it goes with the job. But really, we need to have the freedom to engage with people and meet with them outside and not have police forces using up their resources, checking out premises before you visit them, checking out the people and everything else. I think one of the best elements of our democracy is that closeness that we have with the people who elect us, including the people who don't necessarily vote for us. But as was said earlier on in the programme, once you become a Member of Parliament, you are there to represent everyone in your constituency, not only those who voted for you. And that closeness is something that we should treasure and try to work with and around rather than try to change it.
In terms of communities, I mean, we know Counter Terrorism Police are investigating. What would be your concerns at this hour?
My concern is to make sure that everything is kept in proportion, that we don't jump to conclusion until we have all the evidence. And also, I gather that it's been said that the gentleman is of Somali heritage, that we are careful that we don't find racial attacks and picking on people of Somali origin who are living in this country. This is one individual, and we need to make sure that everything is kept in proportion. The vast majority of people in the United Kingdom, from whatever background they come, are decent, hard-working people, and we need to stick together. We need to rally together as a community, all of us, rather than use this as a means to divide us.
Paula, I mean, just talking to you all this evening on the programme, it does seem to me that you're all very committed to what you do, and you do accept it cannot be risk-free, that in the end the intimacy of your political relationship with your constituents requires a level of risk. Is that right? And would you say that to somebody who was considering making a career in politics?
I think anybody who goes into political life understands that it does come with an element of risk. However, it doesn't mean that, you know, every possible step should be taken to try and minimise that risk. And I think I agree in some respects that we do have to be proportionate, of course we do, but we also have to be honest and candid and resolve to close the gaps where they exist. And there certainly are some gaps. For example, we know from my time as an MP that there is can be quite an inconsistent approach from police services up and down the country in terms of how they deal with threats and abuse to MPs. So, for example, I think that's something that has to be addressed sort of fairly urgently. Similarly, issues around security at MPs' homes and things like that. I do, you know, absolutely accept that the 2 MPs that have been murdered in the last 5 years, you know, that didn't occur in their homes, but nonetheless, you know, these are I think areas that I think, you know, there are areas for improvement.
Thank you very much, Paula Sheriff, Sir Peter Bottomley, Silas Farrar.